Rebecca had been living in her home for about 3 years now. It was a nice neighborhood, the kind with clean streets and well-kept lawns. She'd worked hard to afford this place, and her favorite feature was definitely the pool in her backyard. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was hers, and she loved spending summer evenings floating around after a long day at work. That particular Saturday started out pretty normal. Rebecca had ordered a new smart lock online for her pool fence gate. The old lock had been giving her trouble, sticking and jamming every time she tried to open it. Plus, she liked the idea of being able to lock and unlock it from her phone. It seemed like a simple upgrade, nothing crazy. She was out there in her backyard around 10 in the morning, toolkit spread out on the ground, reading through the installation instructions. The instructions were a bit confusing, but she was determined to figure it out herself. She'd just gotten the old lock off when she heard something behind her. At first, she thought maybe it was just the wind or a neighbor's dog, but then she heard footsteps. Rebecca turned around and her stomach dropped. There was a teenage kid standing right there in her pool area, inside her fence, holding up his phone and recording her. "Excuse me," Rebecca said, straightening up. Her heart was already starting to pound. "What are you doing back here?" The kid didn't even look embarrassed. He was maybe 16 or 17, tall and lanky, wearing a designer hoodie that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly water bill. He kept his phone pointed at her, recording. "I'm documenting," he said flatly, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Documenting what?" Rebecca asked, feeling her face get hot. "This is my backyard. You're on my property. My mom sent me," the kid said with this smug little smile. "She's the HOA president." "I'm documenting violations," Rebecca blinked. She'd dealt with the HOA before, mostly just paying her monthly fees and reading the occasional email about neighborhood events. She knew the president was some woman named Mrs. Chen, but they'd never actually spoken. "What violations?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just replacing a lock on my own fence." "That lock isn't approved," the kid said, zooming in with his phone camera. "You need HOA approval for any external modifications." Rebecca looked down at the smart lock still in its packaging. "It's just a lock. I'm not changing the fence, I'm not painting anything a weird color. It's just a regular lock." "Doesn't matter," the kid said. He was really enjoying this, she could tell. "My mom says any changes need approval, and I'm getting all this on video for the HOA records." Something about the way he said it, so cocky and confident, made Rebecca's blood boil. This wasn't some official inspection. This was a kid trespassing in her yard with a camera. "Okay, you need to leave," Rebecca said firmly. "Right now. This is private property and you don't have permission to be here." The kid actually laughed. "I have HOA authority. My mom gave me permission to inspect properties." "I don't care what your mom said," Rebecca replied, her voice getting louder. "You're in my fenced backyard without my permission. That's trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." She expected him to back down. Most teenagers would have gotten nervous and left at the mention of cops. But this kid just stared at her for a second, then pulled out his phone and started dialing. "Hello. Yes, I need police," he said into the phone, his voice suddenly shaky and scared, completely different from how he'd been talking a second ago. "I'm at 847 Maple Drive. There's a woman here threatening me. She's being really aggressive." Rebecca's mouth fell open. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "No, I don't know her," the kid continued, his voice trembling like he was about to cry. "I was just walking by and she started yelling at me. I think she might have a weapon." "What?" Rebecca nearly shouted. "That's a complete lie. You're in my yard." The kid turned away from her, still talking to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, I'm really scared. Can you please send someone quickly?" Rebecca felt like she was in some kind of nightmare. This couldn't actually be happening. She looked around her backyard, at her toolkit scattered on the ground, at the innocent smart lock in its package. How had her simple Saturday morning project turned into this? The kid hung up and turned back to her, and that smug smile was back on his face. The fake crying voice was completely gone. "Police are on their way," he said casually, like he'd just ordered a pizza. "You shouldn't threaten people." "I didn't threaten you," Rebecca said, her hands shaking now. "You're lying. You're the one who's trespassing." "That's not what I told them," the kid said with a shrug. "And I'm pretty sure they'll believe me over some crazy lady who's already yelling." Rebecca wanted to scream. She wanted to drag this entitled little brat out of her yard herself, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. Getting more upset would only make things worse when the cops showed up. "Fine," she said, pulling out her own phone. We'll wait for the police together, and we'll see what they have to say about someone trespassing and filing a false report." The kid's smile faltered a little at that, but he didn't move. He just stood there, still holding his phone, still recording her. Rebecca's mind was racing. She was trying to remember everything she knew about HOA rules. Could they really send someone into your fenced backyard without permission? That didn't sound right. And even if the HOA president had some kind of authority, surely that didn't extend to her teenage son. She could hear sirens in the distance now, getting closer. Her neighbors were probably going to come out and watch. This was going to be humiliating, having cops show up at her house in the middle of the day. And for what? For trying to install a lock on her own fence? The kid was typing on his phone now, probably texting his mom. Rebecca caught a glimpse of his screen and saw him writing something like, "She's freaking out," with a laughing emoji. That's when Rebecca really understood what was happening. This wasn't about HOA rules or violations. This was a power trip. This kid, backed up by his mom's position, thought he could do whatever he wanted, and he was used to getting away with it. The sirens were really close now, probably just a street or two away. Rebecca looked at the smart lock on the ground, still in its package, and felt a wave of frustration wash over her. All she'd wanted was to replace a broken lock. Now she was about to have to explain to the police why there was a teenager in her backyard claiming she'd threatened him. She took another deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Fine. If this kid wanted to play games, she'd play, but she was going to make sure everyone knew the truth about what really happened here today. The sirens stopped and she heard car doors slamming in front of her house. Here we go, she thought. Rebecca heard footsteps coming around the side of her house. Two police officers appeared, one older with gray hair at his temples, the other younger, maybe in his late 20s. They both had their hands near their belts, alert but not aggressive. "Ma'am, we got a call about a disturbance," the older officer said, his eyes scanning the backyard. Before Rebecca could even open her mouth, the kid rushed toward them. And just like that, his whole demeanor changed again. His face crumpled up, his eyes got watery, and his voice came out all shaky and scared. "Officers, thank God you're here," he said, his voice breaking. "I was just walking through the neighborhood and this lady started screaming at me. She said she was going to hurt me. I think she has a weapon or something." Rebecca felt her face flush hot. "That is absolutely not true. He's lying." The younger officer held up a hand. "Okay, let's take this one at a time. Son, what's your name?" "Brandon." "Brandon Chen," the kid said, wiping at his eyes even though Rebecca couldn't see any actual tears. "My mom is the HOA president. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" the older officer asked, raising an eyebrow. "What job is that?" "Checking for violations," Brandon said quickly. "My mom sends me to document when people break HOA rules. This lady is installing an unapproved lock, and when I tried to take pictures for the report, she threatened me." The older officer turned to Rebecca. "Is that your version of what happened?" Rebecca took a breath, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "No, I was in my backyard installing a new lock on my pool fence gate. That's my fence on my property. I looked up and found him inside my fenced area, recording me without permission. I asked him to leave multiple times and he refused. Then he called 911 and made up a story about me threatening him." "She's lying," Brandon jumped in. "I was just doing my job. My mom has authority to inspect properties." The older officer looked at Brandon for a long moment. "How old are you, son?" 16, Brandon muttered. "And you said you were walking through the neighborhood?" the officer asked. "Well, yeah, checking properties," Brandon said. "But you were inside her fence?" The officer gestured to the pool fence. "In her backyard?" Brandon hesitated. "I mean, yeah, but my mom said I could." The younger officer spoke up now. "Let me ask you something, son. Did this homeowner give you permission to enter her property today?" "I don't need her permission," Brandon said, but his voice was less confident now. "The HOA has authority to inspect. Do you have any documentation of that?" the older officer asked. "Any paperwork showing you're authorized to enter private property?" Brandon pulled out his phone. "I can call my mom. She'll explain everything." "That's fine, but I asked if you have documentation," the officer repeated. "Right now." "On you." Brandon's face was getting red. "No, but my mom is the president. She can vouch for me." The older officer turned to Rebecca. "Ma'am, can I see this lock you were installing?" Rebecca picked up the package from the ground and showed it to him. It was just a regular smart lock, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. Nothing weird or dangerous about it, it's just a lock, she said. The old one was broken, so I bought this one to replace it. That's all I was doing. The officer examined it and nodded. Seems pretty standard. He looked back at Brandon. You said she threatened you with a weapon. What weapon? Brandon's eyes darted around. I don't know, like she had tools and stuff. She was holding something. Rebecca held up a screwdriver. I was holding this because I was installing a lock on my own property. The younger officer was looking through some notes on his phone. Sir, he said to his partner, HOA authority doesn't typically grant access to fenced private property without notice and owner permission. That's trespassing. The older officer nodded. That's what I thought. He turned to Brandon and his voice got more serious. Son, did you actually see this woman threaten you with anything? Brandon shifted his weight from foot to foot. She said she'd call the cops if I didn't leave. That's not a threat, the officer said. That's actually exactly what she should have done if someone was trespassing. Which, from what I'm hearing, you were. But my mom said, Brandon started. I don't care what your mom said, the officer interrupted. Your mom doesn't have the authority to send you onto someone's private property without their permission. That's not how HOA rules work. Brandon's face was completely red now. He wasn't crying anymore. He just looked angry. Now about this 911 call, the older officer continued. You told the dispatcher this woman threatened you and might have a weapon. Was any of that true? Brandon looked at the ground. She was yelling at me. Was she threatening you? The officer repeated. She said she'd call the police, Brandon mumbled. That's not a threat, that's a consequence, the officer said. Did she threaten to hurt you? Did she brandish any weapon at you? There was a long pause. Rebecca held her breath. No. Brandon finally admitted, so quietly she almost couldn't hear it. The older officer sighed heavily. Son, do you understand that filing a false police report is a crime? A serious one? Brandon's eyes went wide. I didn't mean... I just thought... You wasted our time and resources, the younger officer said. We could have been responding to a real emergency while we were coming here for a fake one. I'm sorry, Brandon said quickly. I didn't think about it like that. You need to leave this property right now, the older officer said firmly. And you need to understand that you don't have authority to go into people's yards. No matter what your mother told you, Brandon nodded, still looking at the ground. And ma'am, the officer turned to Rebecca. If he or anyone else from the HOA comes onto your property without permission again, you call us immediately. That's trespassing and it's illegal. I will, Rebecca said, relief flooding through her. The older officer pulled out a business card and handed it to her. Here's the case number for today's call. You might want to keep this in case the HOA tries to give you trouble about this situation. Thank you, Rebecca said, taking the card gratefully. The officer turned back to Brandon. Go on, head home. And think carefully about your actions today. Filing false reports can have serious consequences. If we have to come back here for something like this again, there will be charges. Brandon nodded and started walking toward the front of the house. But right before he disappeared around the corner, Rebecca heard him mutter under his breath, My mom's going to make you regret this. The officers heard it too. The younger one called out, What was that, son? Brandon froze. Nothing. I didn't say anything. Get going, the older officer said sternly. After Brandon left, the officers stayed a few more minutes to take down Rebecca's statement. She told them everything, exactly as it happened. They took photos of the smart lock, the fence, and the backyard layout. You handled this well, the older officer told her before they left. You stayed calm, you didn't escalate. That's exactly what you should do in a situation like this. I was terrified, Rebecca admitted. When he called 911 and lied, I thought, I don't know what I thought. I understand, the officer said kindly. But we could tell right away something wasn't adding up with his story. Kid changes his tale every 30 seconds. You kept yours straight and consistent. After they left, Rebecca stood in her backyard for a long moment, just processing everything that had happened. Her hands were still shaking a little. She looked down at the smart lock, still waiting to be installed, and let out a long breath. This was supposed to be a simple Saturday project. Now she had a police report, a business card with a case number, and the knowledge that the HOA president's son was apparently running around the neighborhood like he owned the place. And worst of all, she kept thinking about what Brandon had muttered as he left. My mom's going to make you regret this. Rebecca had a feeling this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Rebecca tried to put the whole incident out of her mind. She finished installing the smart lock and it worked perfectly. Every time she used it, she felt a small sense of victory. But that feeling didn't last long. 4 days later, she found a certified letter in her mailbox. The return address showed the HOA office. Her stomach sank even before she opened it. Inside was an official-looking document on HOA letterhead, signed by Mrs. Chen. Rebecca read it once, then read it again because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The letter listed 3 violations. First, installing an unapproved smart lock on her pool fence, $200 fine. Second, improper maintenance of pool fence area, another $200. Third, harassment of an HOA representative during an official inspection, $200 more, $600 total. Due within 14 days. Rebecca's hands started shaking as she read it. This was insane. The lock was just a lock. Her fence was in perfect condition. She'd literally checked it over completely while installing the new lock. And harassment? Brandon had been trespassing, and the police had confirmed that. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up the HOA documents she'd received when she bought the house. She'd never really read through them carefully before, just skimmed the basics. But now she went through every single page. It took her almost 2 hours, but she found what she needed. The covenant rules said nothing about requiring approval for security devices on your own property. There were rules about fence colors and heights, rules about pools, rules about landscaping, but nothing that said she needed permission to change a lock. She kept digging and found the section about inspections. It was clear as day. The HOA had to give 48 hours written notice before any inspection, and they needed homeowner consent to enter any fenced or enclosed area of the property. Brandon had done neither. Rebecca felt her anger building, but it was the focused kind now, not the panicked kind from when he'd called 911. This time she knew she was right. She had proof. She spent the next evening drafting a response letter. She kept it professional and factual. She cited the exact sections of the HOA bylaws that proved she hadn't violated anything. She attached photos she'd taken the day of the incident, time-stamped to show her fence was in excellent condition. She included a copy of the police report number from when Brandon had filed his false 911 call. Then she went further. She filed a formal complaint with the HOA board about Brandon's trespassing and about Mrs. Chen issuing retaliatory fines. The bylaws said any homeowner could file a complaint, and it had to be addressed at the next board meeting. Rebecca printed everything out, made copies, and sent it all certified mail. Then she waited. Mrs. Chen's response came fast. Too fast. Within 3 days, Rebecca got another letter. This one said that after reviewing her response, the board had determined she was still in violation. Not only were the fines staying, but they were being doubled for failure to comply and for filing a frivolous complaint. $1,200 now. Due in 7 days. Rebecca stared at the letter in disbelief. This woman was just making up rules as she went along. There was no way this was legal. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that $1,200. She had the money technically, but that wasn't the point. The point was that this was completely unfair. Mrs. Chen was abusing her power, and apparently nobody was stopping her. The next day was Saturday, and Rebecca saw there was a general HOA meeting scheduled that evening. These happened quarterly and any homeowner could attend. The agenda was posted online, just the usual boring stuff about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Rebecca decided she was going to that meeting. She spent the afternoon preparing. She printed out extra copies of everything, the photos, the police report number, the relevant sections of the bylaws. She put it all in a folder and practiced what she wanted to say. When she arrived at the community clubhouse that evening, there were maybe 20 people there. Most were older, retirement age. A few younger couples. Everyone was chatting casually, holding cups of coffee. Mrs. Chen stood at the front of the room arranging papers on a table. She was a thin woman, probably in her late 40s, dressed in an expensive-looking pantsuit. When she saw Rebecca walk in, her expression went cold. The meeting started with the usual routine stuff. Budget updates, reminders about trash pickup days, a discussion about repainting the neighborhood entrance sign. Rebecca waited, her folder clutched in her lap, her heart pounding. Finally, they got to the open forum section where homeowners could bring up concerns. Rebecca raised her hand. Mrs. Chen's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, Rebecca stood up. Her legs felt wobbly, but her voice came out steady. I want to talk about HOA violations and the inspection process. This isn't the appropriate forum for individual violation disputes, Mrs. Chen said quickly. You can schedule a private meeting. Actually, Rebecca said, according to the bylaws, any homeowner can bring up concerns about HOA procedures at a general meeting. This isn't about my specific case. It's about how inspections are being conducted. A few people around the room shifted in their seats, suddenly more interested. Rebecca continued. 4 days ago, the HOA president's son entered my fenced backyard without permission and without notice. When I asked him to leave, he called 911 and filed a false police report. I have documentation of all of this. The room went quiet. Mrs. Chen's face was turning red. That's not what happened, Mrs. Chen said. My son was conducting an authorized inspection and you became belligerent. The police report says otherwise, Rebecca said calmly. And according to Section 7 of our HOA bylaws, inspections require 48 hours written notice and homeowner consent for fenced areas. Neither was provided. An older man near the front raised his hand. I want to hear more about this. Mrs. Chen looked flustered. This is inappropriate. We don't air personal grievances at general meetings. But now other people were speaking up. A woman in the back row said, Wait, I got a violation notice last week too. My grandson left his bike in my driveway overnight and I got fined $100. That's a violation of the property maintenance code, Mrs. Chen said quickly. For a bike? In my own driveway? The woman asked. That seems excessive. An older couple near the window looked at each other. The husband spoke up. We got fined for unauthorized gardening last month. We planted some tomatoes in our backyard. Our fenced backyard. How did anyone even know they were there? Mrs. Chen was shuffling papers on her table, not making eye contact. These are all documented violations. If you want to dispute them, you can file an appeal. We did file an appeal, the wife said. You denied it and doubled the fine. Rebecca felt her chest get tight with a mix of vindication and anger. She wasn't the only one. This had been happening to other people too. A younger woman with a toddler on her lap spoke up hesitantly. I got a fine for my kid's toy car being on the lawn. They said it was an eyesore. It was there for maybe an hour while we had lunch. Rules are rules, Mrs. Chen said, but her voice was getting defensive now. The older man from the front row stood up. Rebecca recognized him vaguely, thought his name might be Patterson or something. He looked like he'd been retired for a while, distinguished in that professor kind of way. Mrs. Chen, he said, I'm curious about something. How much money has been collected in fines over the past year? Mrs. Chen blinked. That information is in the financial reports, which haven't been distributed in 6 months, he said. I've asked for them 3 times. We've been busy with other matters, Mrs. Chen said. I'm sure, Mr. Patterson said dryly. But as a homeowner and member of this HOA, I have a right to see how our money is being spent, including fine revenue. The room was buzzing now. People were whispering to each other, and Rebecca could hear fragments of conversations. Someone else had gotten a fine for parking in their own driveway. Someone else got written up for their mailbox being the wrong shade of brown. Mrs. Chen held up her hands. This meeting is getting out of control. We need to stick to the agenda. The agenda includes homeowner concerns, Mr. Patterson said firmly, and I have several concerns, starting with the fact that I don't recall voting you in as HOA president. Mrs. Chen's face went pale, then flushed red again. The previous president moved away. Someone had to step up. Yes, but according to our bylaws, that requires a vote, Mr. Patterson said. I don't remember one. Does anyone else? People around the room shook their heads. Someone said, I thought there was supposed to be an election. This is ridiculous, Mrs. Chen said, gathering her papers. I've been doing this job for 18 months with no appreciation whatsoever. 18 months of questionable fines and no financial transparency, Mr. Patterson said. I think we need to call for an emergency election and a full audit of HOA funds. Several people started nodding and voicing agreement. Mrs. Chen looked around the room, her expression desperate now. You can't just, this isn't how this works, she stammered. Actually, Mr. Patterson said, pulling out his own copy of the bylaws, it's exactly how this works. Rebecca sat back down, her folder still in her lap. She'd come here expecting to fight her own battle alone. Instead, she'd opened the door to something much bigger. The meeting ended with Mrs. Chen storming out, her papers clutched to her chest. But Mr. Patterson stayed behind, and so did about a dozen other homeowners. They gathered in small groups, talking in low, urgent voices. Rebecca found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. The elderly woman with the bike violation, whose name was Dorothy, pulled out her own folder of letters. The younger mom, Julie, showed Rebecca photos of the tiny toy car that had gotten her fined $50. Mr. Patterson was taking notes on a legal pad, writing down names and dates. Rebecca watched him work and finally asked, "Are you a lawyer?" He smiled. "Retired. Spent 30 years in contract law. When I moved here, I thought I'd just relax and play golf. But I've been keeping an eye on things. Started noticing irregularities about a year ago." "What kind of irregularities?" Rebecca asked. He glanced around to make sure Mrs. Chen was really gone, then lowered his voice. "The financials don't add up. Our HOA fees are pretty standard for a neighborhood this size, and we don't have that many expenses. But somehow we're always running a tight budget. Meanwhile, Mrs. Chen has been issuing fines left and right. Where's the money going?" Rebecca asked. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Mr. Patterson said. "I've requested financial records multiple times. Each time I get incomplete information or delays. Last month I finally filed a formal request citing the bylaws. That's when things got interesting." He pulled out a letter from his own folder. It was from Mrs. Chen, denying his request on the grounds that financial records were confidential board business. "But that's not true," Rebecca said, scanning the letter. "I read the bylaws. Any homeowner can request financial records." "Exactly," Mr. Patterson said, "which tells me she's hiding something. And after tonight hearing how many people have been getting these excessive fines, I think I know what it is." Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca watched Mr. Patterson work like a man on a mission. He organized a group of concerned homeowners, collected testimonies about improper fines, and started digging through public records. Rebecca met with him and 5 other homeowners at a coffee shop one evening. Mr. Patterson spread out printouts across 2 tables. "Okay, here's what I've found so far," he said. "In the past 18 months since Mrs. Chen became president, this HOA has issued $43,000 in violation fines." Dorothy gasped. "43,000? That seems like a lot," Julie said. "How many houses are in this neighborhood?" "Maybe 200. 212, Mr. Patterson confirmed. "Which means on average each household has been fined about $200. Some more, some less. But here's the thing. I pulled the financial records from the previous HOA president's term. In his last 2 years, total fines collected were under $5,000. The table went quiet. Rebecca felt her stomach turn. "So she's collecting almost 10 times more in fines than the previous president?" "Correct," Mr. Patterson said. "And when I look at the violations being issued, most of them are minor or questionable. Things that were never enforced before. Or in some cases, things that aren't actually violations at all according to our covenants." He pulled out another sheet. "Now here's where it gets really interesting. I filed a public records request with the county for any business licenses or permits associated with Mrs. Chen's name. Guess what I found?" Nobody answered. They were all leaning forward, waiting. "Her son Brandon is listed as an employee of a property inspection company that Mrs. Chen owns," Mr. Patterson said. "A company she started 6 months after becoming HOA president." "Wait," Rebecca said slowly. "So she's paying her own son to do HOA inspections? With HOA money?" "That's what it looks like," Mr. Patterson said. "But it gets worse. I also found tuition payment records. Brandon attends Riverside Prep, that expensive private school across town. Tuition is $35,000 a year." Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. "She's using HOA fine money to pay for her son's private school?" "I can't prove that for certain yet," Mr. Patterson admitted. "But the timeline matches up. She becomes president, starts issuing massive amounts of fines, creates a fake inspection company, and suddenly can afford private school tuition. Add it all up and it's pretty damning." Rebecca thought about Brandon standing in her backyard, so smug and confident. That's why he was so cocky. He literally thought he could do whatever he wanted because his mom was funneling money to them. "Most likely," Mr. Patterson said, "and she's been banking on people not questioning it. Most folks just pay the fine because it's easier than fighting." Or they don't realize they have the right to see the financial records. So what do we do? Julie asked. Can we just remove her as president? We can call for a vote, Mr. Patterson said. According to the bylaws, if 15% of homeowners sign a petition, we can trigger an emergency election. That's 32 signatures. I think we can get that easily. But what about the money? Dorothy asked. What about all the fines she collected unfairly? Do we just lose that? Mr. Patterson's expression turned serious. That's where we might need to involve law enforcement. If she's been using HOA funds for personal expenses, that's embezzlement. That's a crime. The word hung in the air. Embezzlement. This had gone from annoying HOA drama to actual criminal activity. I have a contact at the county prosecutor's office, Mr. Patterson continued. I've already reached out informally. They're interested, but they need documentation. So here's what I'm thinking. We organize the emergency election first. Get her out of power. Then we conduct a full audit of the finances. Once we have solid proof of where the money went, we file a criminal complaint. Everyone at the table nodded. It sounded like a plan. Over the next few days, Rebecca and the others went door to door collecting signatures. It was easier than she expected. Almost everyone they talked to had a story about unfair fines or aggressive enforcement. Some people had been too afraid to speak up before, worried about retaliation. But once they heard other people were having the same experience, they were eager to help. Within a week, they had 68 signatures. More than double what they needed. Mr. Patterson filed the petition officially, following every requirement in the bylaws to the letter. The emergency election was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Mrs. Chen fought back, of course. She sent out a mass email to all homeowners claiming that a small group of troublemakers was trying to undermine the HOA's authority. She accused Mr. Patterson of harassment and said Rebecca had started all this because she didn't want to follow the rules. But it was too late. Too many people had seen the truth. Rebecca got another letter from Mrs. Chen during this time. This one threatened legal action if she continued to spread false information about the HOA and its president. Rebecca showed it to Mr. Patterson, who just laughed. She's panicking, he said. Empty threats. She knows what's coming. The night before the election, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about everything that had happened. It had started with just wanting to fix a broken lock. Now she was part of taking down a corrupt HOA president. The election was held at the clubhouse again, but this time, the room was packed. Over 100 homeowners showed up, the biggest turnout anyone could remember. Mrs. Chen tried to maintain control, standing at the front with her usual stack of papers. But the energy in the room was different now. People weren't quiet and passive. They were engaged and angry. Mr. Patterson gave a short speech about transparency and proper governance. He outlined exactly what he planned to do if elected. Immediate financial audit, review of all fines issued in the past 18 months, and new rules requiring board approval for any enforcement actions. Mrs. Chen gave a defensive speech about how hard she'd worked and how ungrateful everyone was being. A few people actually booed, which Rebecca had never seen at an HOA meeting before. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. Mr. Patterson won with 87% of the vote. Mrs. Chen's face went white. She gathered her things without a word and headed for the door. But Mr. Patterson stopped her. We'll need access to all HOA financial records, files, and accounts, he said firmly. Tonight before you leave. I don't have those with me, Mrs. Chen said. Then we'll go to your house and get them, Mr. Patterson said. This is official business. The homeowners have voted. You're no longer president, and you're required by the bylaws to turn over all HOA property immediately. For a moment, Rebecca thought Mrs. Chen might refuse, but she saw something in the other woman's expression, a kind of defeat. She knew she was caught. Fine, Mrs. Chen said quietly. They're in my home office. Mr. Patterson, Rebecca, and 2 other board members followed Mrs. Chen to her house. It was just a few streets over, a nice 2-story with a perfectly manicured lawn. Inside, Mrs. Chen led them to her office. There were filing cabinets full of HOA documents. Mr. Patterson started going through them methodically while Mrs. Chen sat in a chair, silent. It took about an hour, but they found what they needed. Bank statements showing deposits from HOA accounts into Mrs. Chen's personal accounts. Invoices from her inspection company billing the HOA for services that were supposedly covered by normal HOA fees. Checks written to Riverside Prep for Brandon's tuition, directly from HOA funds. Mr. Patterson photographed everything with his phone. "This is enough," he said quietly. Mr. Patterson didn't waste any time. The very next morning, he met with his contact at the county prosecutor's office and turned over all the evidence they'd collected. Rebecca went with him, bringing her own documentation of the false fines and Brandon's trespassing incident. The prosecutor, a serious woman named Ms. Rodriguez, reviewed everything carefully. She asked questions, took notes, and had them sign official statements. "This is a clear case of embezzlement," she said finally. "Probably fraud as well. We'll need to do our own investigation, but what you've provided here is more than enough to open a criminal case." "How long will that take?" Mr. Patterson asked. "Could be a few months," Ms. Rodriguez said. "These things move slowly. But I can tell you right now, based on what I'm seeing, Mrs. Chen is looking at serious charges." Walking out of the prosecutor's office, Rebecca felt strange. Vindicated, but also a little sad. She'd never wanted any of this. She just wanted to replace a lock. The news spread through the neighborhood fast. Some people were shocked. Others said they'd suspected something was off for a while. A few people who'd been friendly with Mrs. Chen stopped talking to Rebecca, like this was somehow her fault. But most people were grateful. Dorothy baked Rebecca cookies and left them on her doorstep with a note that said, "Thank you for speaking up." Julie and her husband invited Rebecca over for dinner. Other neighbors she'd barely spoken to before started waving when they saw her. Mr. Patterson got to work immediately as the new HOA president. His first official act was to issue refunds for any fines that had been improperly assessed in the past year. Rebecca got her $600 back, plus the additional $600 from the doubled fine. Other people got their money back too. It wasn't everything that had been stolen, but it was something. He also established new rules. All HOA inspections had to be scheduled in writing with 48 hours notice. No one could enter a fenced or enclosed area without explicit homeowner permission. All fines had to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being issued. And financial records would be published online every quarter for complete transparency. The neighborhood felt different after that. People were more engaged, showing up to meetings, asking questions. It was like everyone had woken up and realized they actually had a say in how things were run. About 6 weeks after the election, Rebecca was out by her pool when she heard a knock at her front door. She walked around to find 2 police officers standing there, different ones from before. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Is everything okay?" "Ma'am, we're here about Brandon Chen," one of the officers said. "We understand he trespassed on your property and filed a false police report back in September." "Yes," Rebecca said. "I gave a statement about that." "We know," the officer said. "The prosecutor's office is moving forward with charges against Mrs. Chen, and they're considering whether to charge Brandon as well for the false report and trespassing. Since you're the victim in that part of the case, they wanted us to discuss your options with you." Rebecca's stomach twisted. She'd been angry at Brandon, sure, but the thought of him having a criminal record when he was just 16 felt heavy. "What are my options?" she asked. "You can press charges," the officer explained. "Given his age, he'd likely go through the juvenile system. Or you can agree to a settlement where he accepts responsibility, apologizes, and agrees to community service or other conditions. The prosecutor is willing to go either way." Rebecca thought about it. She thought about Brandon standing in her yard with that smug smile, calling 911 and lying. But she also thought about him sitting upstairs in his house, hearing people in his mom's office about to find out his whole life was built on stolen money. "I want the settlement," Rebecca said. "I want a real apology in writing. And I want him to understand what he did was wrong. But I don't want to ruin his life." The officers nodded. "We'll pass that along to the prosecutor." 2 weeks later, Rebecca got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten from Brandon. "Dear Rebecca," it started, and she noticed he'd crossed out Mrs. Mitchell and written her first name instead, like he'd struggled with how to address her. "I'm writing to apologize for trespassing on your property and for lying to the police. What I did was wrong, and I know that now. My mom told me I had authority to inspect properties and that homeowners had to comply with HOA rules no matter what. I believed her because she's my mom and I thought she knew what she was doing. But that doesn't excuse my behavior. I should have left when you asked me to. And I definitely shouldn't have called 911 and lied. That was really messed up. I'm doing community service now, 40 hours at the county park. My mom is probably going to jail and I had to leave Riverside Prep because we can't afford it anymore. I'm at the public high school now. Everything in my life is different. Some of that is my fault and some isn't, but either way I'm dealing with it. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for invading your privacy and for trying to get you in trouble when you were right and I was wrong. I hope someday you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. Brandon Chen. Rebecca read the letter 3 times. It sounded genuine. She could tell he'd written it himself, not copied something his lawyer gave him. She folded it carefully and put it in her file with all the other documents from this whole mess. The criminal case against Mrs. Chen moved forward slowly, just like the prosecutor had warned. There were hearings and motions and delays, but eventually, about 5 months after that first meeting, Mrs. Chen pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud. Rebecca went to the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was small and formal. Mrs. Chen looked different than she had at those HOA meetings, smaller somehow, defeated. She wore a plain gray suit instead of her usual expensive clothes. The judge reviewed the case, talked about the breach of trust, the impact on the community. Then he pronounced sentence: 2 years in county jail, 5 years probation after that, and full restitution of the stolen funds. Mrs. Chen would have to pay back every penny she'd taken plus penalties. It would probably take her years. Rebecca knew she'd never really get her money back, not all of it. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. After the hearing, Mr. Patterson invited Rebecca and several other homeowners to lunch. They sat at a diner booth eating burgers and talking about everything that had happened. "You know," Dorothy said, pointing a French fry at Rebecca, "none of this would have happened if you hadn't spoken up at that meeting. You started this whole thing." Rebecca shook her head. "I didn't start it. Mrs. Chen started it when she decided to steal from all of us. I just got fed up with being pushed around." "Well, thank God for that," Julie said. "I was so scared of her. I never would have said anything on my own." "That's how people like her operate," Mr. Patterson said. "They count on everyone being too afraid or too busy to stand up to them. It only takes one person asking questions to bring the whole thing down." Rebecca thought about that. One person asking questions. That's all it had taken. Well, that and Mr. Patterson being thorough and knowledgeable, and Dorothy and Julie and everyone else being willing to speak up once they knew they weren't alone. 6 months after everything settled down, Rebecca was out by her pool on a Saturday afternoon. The smart lock on her fence gate worked perfectly, as it had since the day she installed it. She'd never had any more problems with it, or with the HOA, or with anyone entering her property without permission. She heard the lock beep as someone opened it, and looked up to see Mr. Patterson walking through. They'd become friends through all of this, and he'd taken to stopping by occasionally to sit by the pool and chat. "Hope you don't mind," he said, settling into one of her patio chairs. "Beautiful day." "Not at all," Rebecca said. "How are things going with the HOA?" "Smooth as silk," he said with a smile. "Boring, actually, which is exactly how HOA business should be. We collected dues, we paid our landscaping company, we fixed the sprinklers at the entrance. Nobody got any fines because nobody did anything fine-worthy." "Sounds perfect," Rebecca said. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to birds and the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. "You know," Mr. Patterson said, "I was thinking about putting in a pool. Think you could recommend a good contractor?" Rebecca laughed. "Sure, just make sure you get a good lock for your fence." "Oh, I don't know about that," Mr. Patterson said with a grin. "I heard installing unauthorized locks can get you in trouble with the HOA. They both laughed at that, and Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. When thinking about her home and her neighborhood, she felt peaceful. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and stressful and honestly, kinda scary at times, but it had also brought the community together in a way nothing else could have. People knew their neighbors now. They paid attention to HOA business. They asked questions and expected answers, and Rebecca had learned something important about herself. She'd always thought of herself as someone who avoided conflict, who just tried to keep her head down and not make waves. But when it really mattered, when something was truly unfair, she could stand up. She could speak out. She could fight back, all because of a smart lock on a pool fence. Her phone buzzed with a notification, the smart lock app letting her know the gate had been opened. just Mr. Patterson letting him.